I'm Elisa Parenti, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's start with a check of your first word news. With far fewer crowds than his predecessor and as protests hit cities across the country, Donald J. Trump was sworn in today as the 45th president of the United States. Mr. Trump wasted no time attacking the Washington establishment, vowing to return power to the American public and to deliver on campaign promises. Mr. Trump also pledged that U.S. interests will be at the front and center of his presidency. Police and protesters clashing several times today in the nation's capital as Donald Trump was sworn in. Authorities had to resort to tear gas as hundreds of demonstrators did considerable damage across several city blocks. More than 90 arrests have been made. Meantime, in London, hundreds gathered in front of the U.S. Embassy to protest the inauguration. Both U.K. and U.S. protesters say they are concerned about the direction the new president appears to be taking U.S. government policy. There were similar protests in Germany. And the Senate now has the votes to confirm James Mattis as U.S. Secretary of Defense. The Senate Armed Services Committee already voted in favor of the retired Army general this week. And in his first significant act as president, Mr. Trump signed legislation allowing Mattis to run the Pentagon. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,600 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Elisa Parenti. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Caroline Hyde. This is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, it's official. Donald Trump is now America's 45th president. We'll break down the historic inauguration day and what Trump means for tech. Plus, Apple bites back. The most valuable company in the world sues Qualcomm over patent royalties. And Snap hits the road with a $20 billion pitch. Why the startup believes addiction will help vindicate its valuation. But first, to our lead. A new era here in the United States as it was inauguration day for Donald J. Trump. The New York businessman has become the 45th president of the United States and is already signing orders nominating his new cabinet. And here to break down the historical day is Bloomberg's Kevin Cirilli from our DC bureau. Kevin, we've been watching all of today's events, as have you. There was some lip service paid to the technologies of tomorrow, but what was key for you in the speech?
A couple of things. First and foremost, he's vowing to immediately get to work. During a very short, quite frankly, inauguration address, he vowed to get the ball rolling on a host of issues, from rolling back key regulatory issues like Dodd-Frank to increasing infrastructure spending, as well as lowering taxes for the middle class. He vowed to be a president for all Americans, but again, speaking in his signature tone, he presented himself as a political outsider and someone who transcends political party. And then, of course, in classic Trump fashion, he ended with he would promise to make America great again.
How did this resonate, therefore, with the American public?
Well, I was on Capitol Hill earlier today, and I was speaking with some key aides to Democratic members, and it was, of course, a particularly partisan speech. Democrats are already organizing in terms of how to serve as the opposition party to President Trump. On Monday, Rex Tillerson, his Secretary of Defense nominee, will get voted on, and they're quite, pessimistic about their chances of blocking any of Trump's nominees. That being said, Republicans like what they heard. But there are several issues, most notably Trump's position on the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which he opposes, that Republicans are divided on. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not, and for how long, if they do, Republicans fall in line behind this new administration, or if we start to notice divisions between the Tea Party and more establishment type of Republicans.
Certainly an anti-establishment call from the speech. Bloomberg's
Yes.
Kevin Cirilli, thank you. And we'll be digging into what Trump means for tech a little later in the show. But first, to a clash of two tech titans. Apple has filed a lawsuit accusing Qualcomm of monopolizing the market for chips used in wireless devices. It's also seeking more than $1 billion that it says Qualcomm withheld in retaliation for Apple's cooperation with antitrust authorities in South Korea. And this marks the first direct challenge to Qualcomm by one of its biggest customers. Pleased to say the scoop getters are with us. Bloomberg technology reporter Ian King covers the major chip makers. Alex Webb covers Apple. A great piece out today, moving the market. And first you, Ian, it was the FTC earlier this week. Now we move to Apple suing. Remind us what this is all about.
Right. Well, the fundamentals of Qualcomm's business, where it gets all of its profit dollars, is from patents that underpin all modern phone systems. If you make a phone, you pay Qualcomm. That's what this is all about. That's the fundamentals. Apple doesn't like that and is trying to do something about that.
And it feels that they pay too much because the percentage is based on the cost of the phone, perhaps not the cost of the part. Yeah. Alex, what does Apple want to achieve by suing Qualcomm?
I mean, Apple's firstly saying that Qualcomm has withheld money from it, which it agreed to pay. Well, yeah, it's big numbers that it agreed to pay Apple, but in return for Apple not talking to essentially law enforcement and regulatory authorities. That's part of the agreement that Qualcomm claims Apple signed. Apple said, look, if you're subpoenaed by regulatory authorities, you have to speak to them. We were only doing what is right and just. And so that's what's at heart here. But really what Apple wants is that in their broader business case and business model, what Apple always tries to do is have more than one supplier for any given component. That allows them to play the suppliers off against each other, get lower prices, and until last year, until the iPhone 7, Qualcomm dominated that part of the phone.
This is all about getting more margin for each iPhone that they sell. But Ian, who wins out of this? Because now it seems that Apple doesn't have to just go to Qualcomm.
Right. I mean, all of these licensing fees have given Qualcomm a huge lead, as Alex just alluded to. That kind of is getting whittled away. Intel has now been used by Apple, so there's a potential for a market share shift there. But also the winners and losers. I mean, you look at Qualcomm's gross margin, it's nearly 60%. Look at Apple's, sub 40. What Apple wants is fundamentally is a transference there.
And I think it's at this moment when iPhone sales have declined, the first decline since the phone came to the market 10 years ago, that's placed extra emphasis on quite how much money they can squeeze out of every single handset. That's why Tim Cook pushes services as another way of getting recurring revenue from phones. But if then they can then squeeze the profit margins higher for the hardware, that's of course very important.
This is something clearly irritating Apple, particularly as they see their profits under pressure. But is this something that irritates the rest of the phone makers? Is this something we might see others come out and sue?
Well, again, back to the conjecture of who's behind all of this. It's no secret that South Korea, which is the most strident to come out against Qualcomm so far, is home to Samsung Electronics, the world's largest mobile phone maker, LG, which is Qualcomm's third largest customer. It's not difficult to imagine that handset makers throughout the world would like a better arrangement with Qualcomm.
I mean, we're going to be waiting to see what Qualcomm responds. They haven't as yet. But speaking to Apple at the moment, do they feel they're caught between a rock and a hard place and they had to come out? I mean, how much are they also cause for concern about the $1 billion that was being withheld? Is that also what's at stake?
Obviously $1 billion for Apple, it is a lot of money, but they make a lot more. I think possibly the element is more likely to be that Qualcomm's down right now, strike them while they're down and try and claim advantage while you can. This is Tim Cook's Apple, who's built this business on an extremely good and efficient supply chain. And so trying to, as we said, squeeze everything out of those suppliers is key to the way that he runs that company.
Yeah, what next?
We just talked to people, to get their take on this, and they're like, look, this is a negotiation.
Yeah.
Qualcomm tends to win. Legal cases take years and years, so there's no immediate benefit to anybody here. Unless they can settle for lower license rates.
We'll be taking a look at Qualcomm's market cap. It was down again about 2% on the back of your news. Thank you very much for the great scoop and for coming on and telling us about it. That was Bloomberg Technology's Ian King and Alex Webb across the story. And later this hour, a big Bloomberg scoop. Snapchat is revealing key metrics to potential investors, aiming to show just how much its users are addicted to the app ahead of a massive IPO. Details later. As we head to break, here's a live shot of the inaugural parade in Washington. This is Bloomberg. Now, amid the rainbows here in San Francisco, a story we're watching. AT&T is no longer on a losing streak. The number 2 US wireless carrier signed up new pay TV customers for the first time in 7 quarters. The company credited its new live online video service, DirecTV Now. The service helped woo at least 200,000 video subscribers in the 4th quarter and offset a loss of satellite TV customers. Now, analysts were expecting just 61,000. AT&T introduced DirecTV Now in November and charges $60 a month for 100-plus channels. Now, Donald Trump paid lip service to the tech industry during his inauguration.
We stand at the birth of a new millennium, ready to unlock the mysteries of space, to free the Earth from the miseries of disease, and to harness the energies, industries, and technologies of tomorrow.
So what is in store for the tech industry in the new administration? How big of a change will it be from former President Obama, who is seen as, well, the first fully digital president? Joining us is Dave McClure. He's founding partner of 500 Startups. And from New York, live, is managing director of Greycroft Partners, Alan Patricof. Alan, I will start with you. And harness the technologies of tomorrow. Will we see an administration as open to the technology changes that we saw under Obama?
I think it's hard to predict anything about our new president. I hear what he says, but he says one thing one day, and then the same day will say something else. So we're living in an environment where we're going to have a lot of new things happening that are already underway. The autonomous vehicle, robotics, AI, machine learning, all of those are going to have tremendous impact in a positive basis. On the other hand, it's also going to have a dramatic impact, I believe, over time on employment and his ability and desire to put people back to work. So they're two countervailing forces working against each other. I hear what he says, and I don't think he comes with any particular background in this area, but it'll be interesting to see what he initiates. He does have some involvement with some of the people out in Silicon Valley, and Dave, I'm sure, would have a better insight as to which technologies Donald Trump will be helpful with.
And Dave, which technologies will Trump be helpful with?
Well, I don't know if he'll be helpful with technology specifically, but I think he'll create a lot of chaos and volatility. And even though that might not be great for the rest of America, in general, volatility is friendly to most entrepreneurs. We can react a lot faster than traditional businesses, and there'll probably be opportunities created. I think also because it sounds like there's a high likelihood of repatriation of foreign and overseas capital, that's probably going to be good for all boats. I think you'll see a lot more investment, both in companies and funds, and a lot more M&A activity. And I have a feeling because of the relationship with Jared Kushner and his brother Josh Kushner, who actually is a VC, I hope there is a little conflict and that maybe some knowledge is passed along from both him and my former boss, Peter Thiel, as well.
Alan, talk about potentially the M&A that we might see to come. It's odd, we see perhaps a more positive environment coming from the promises from Donald Trump, but on one side he's then talking against the AT&T Time Warner tie-up. What do you think about the M&A atmosphere?
I agree with Dave. I think it's going to be we're going to have a positive environment if the president implements the things he's talked about doing, and if Congress will support him on it. If they end up lowering taxes, if they do repatriation of enormous swells of capital that have been abroad for the last umpteen years, that augurs very well for a very active M&A activity, because corporations will have money, and we've seen them do buybacks and pay dividends. I think acquisitions is a very fertile area to put money to work.
Acquisitions could mean exits for startups that you help support. But it's interesting also the talk of trade. We heard Alan there talk of it's potentially the robots that are at the key issue of jobs, not the fact that it's actually trade at stake. But how much are your startups worried about perhaps barriers and borders coming up?
There are concerns. I think there's concerns both in being able to sell to customers overseas and buy goods and integrate those. There's concerns about immigration. Potentially, the new administration might have a tougher policy on letting entrepreneurs come to this country. I spent a lot of time actually with a bunch of folks, Brad Feld and others, on trying to help put a startup visa program together. There is now kind of an international entrepreneur rule that will allow people to come in with maybe $250K in capital, but that's not really legislation yet. So I think there's concerns about whether we can still conduct trade freely, both in the tech sector as well as more generally. I think there's probably some concerns maybe about the regulatory environment changing. And again, that could be for better or for worse. It's not necessarily clear, but you might see a loosening of a lot of regulatory agencies that could be perceived as beneficial for companies going public and that, but it could also create some consumer privacy concerns as well.
Alan, if you... please carry on.
One of the things I take exception with Dave on is that the market in general, meaning the business community, and I would include startups and anyone else involved in business activities, hates surprises. And what concerns me more than anything else as we look forward to the public markets and even the private markets is, will the president be so mercurial that there won't be a confidence in the consistency of his program? And if that happens, that causes people to hold on to their money and not to be and to be reluctant to put it to work or to do startups. And we don't know, where we're going, frankly, at this moment. We'll see it pretty fast, I think.
And Alan, are you worried about putting your money to work right now, therefore?
Well, the venture business is a very interesting one. It's kind of survived in all presidencies, high interest rates, low interest rates, and there's an enormous entrepreneurial wave going on in this country, and I think it would be hard to stop it. On the other hand, there are exogenous events and activities that could be surprises. I mean, we don't know what this health change in Obamacare will do if the president really goes through with this and doesn't find a replacement. Will that impact people who want to start up companies and are afraid to leave? It sounds strange, but there are existing healthcare programs that they have, and if that potentially revives giving it up and start something, that could be if you have pre-existing conditions, although he said he'll protect that. I think it's all uncertainty at this point.
Clarity, clearly the watchword at the moment. Dave McClure of 500 Startups will be sticking with us, coming back a little bit later in the hour. Alan Petrikov, Managing Director of Greycroft Partners, you're staying with me for after the break. Thank you, gentlemen. Now, because next we measure the prospects of Silicon Valley leaders throwing their hats in the political arena as Donald Trump is officially sworn in as US president. This is Bloomberg. Republican Ajit Pai is said to be President Donald Trump's choice to lead the Federal Communications Commission. This, according to a person familiar with the transition. Now, Democratic Chairman Tom Wheeler stepped down Friday as the incoming administration took office. Pai is known for opposing the FCC's 2015 net neutrality ruling, which forbid internet service providers from unfairly blocking or slowing web traffic. Pai would take over the FCC with a 2-to-1 Republican majority. Continuing with our theme this hour and how the tech sector will be impacted by President Trump, I want to focus now on immigration because it was one of Trump's most controversial points throughout the campaign, and he's wavered on exactly how tightening these policies might impact the highly skilled worker visas that Silicon Valley relies on to draw top talent. 500 Startups founder Dave McClure is still with us, and you have investments across 60 countries. You've been helping startups in the thousands. Is immigration something that's worrying the founders you're talking to?
Well, we're always concerned with trying to make immigration easier for people. We generally think the flow of people across borders is positive for business and for innovation. In particular, a lot of tech companies in Silicon Valley have been started by immigrants and the children of immigrants. In fact, the entire Bay Area is full of people from other places that started technology companies here and work for technology companies here.
And so, do you think sense or ease will prevail? Will we see visas being supported? Is it something you're talking to the Washington about?
Well, yes, actually, we've done a lot of talking to Washington about this issue. As far back as 2009 and 10, Brad Feld and myself and some other VCs, Eric Ries, Shervin Peshevar, went to D.C. to try and get the startup visa started. Paul Graham from Y Combinator wrote about that as well. We did a lot of work and actually got support from both the left and right side of the aisle, but we couldn't ever get the comprehensive immigration policy across the table. I guess really the administration was challenged in that they were trying to get a lot of other issues, not just startup visas, across.
You as an investor, when you're looking at all the companies you're investing in at the moment, do you start to look outside the America even more so than you are now because of what's happening in terms of political uncertainty? Well,
I think, when we first started investing globally, it was because of the opportunities around the world, and there is a lot of volatility. We thought, okay, maybe if we diversify across many funds and countries, we'll be less vulnerable to political instability. Little do we know that might be happening here at home in the U.S. But we've started funds in places like Turkey and Thailand, and we are really strong believers in the engineering talent there and the market opportunities there.
Despite political instability there?
You know, I would say sometimes that political instability is maybe more extreme when viewed from afar than right up front. I'm not trying to make light of any of those situations, but I think there's a lot of positive forces that investing in entrepreneurship can have around the world that are positive for those countries and also positive for the U.S. In fact, in ways that I think national security may be overlooked sometimes.
Is there a particular area that could thrive? I mean, we just heard from Alan Patrickov there talking of AI and robotics still being a big area, but is there anything that cybersecurity, talking of being a real focus, are these investment opportunities almost in the current circumstances?
Absolutely, and it's funny, sometimes the talent for those types of businesses is coming from the same places where the threats are coming from.
So you're looking at Russia, you're looking at Asia. There's
lots of smart people in Russia and Asia, and we're always happy to invest in those people too. But I think there is absolutely going to be more attention to cybersecurity. There already was anyway. If you look at firms like Palantir, they're certainly doing a lot of information gathering for probably both government and financial services. So I think there's lots of opportunities there, but there's lots of opportunities outside all the sexy topics. A lot of things we do are really sort of basic everyday, services, e-commerce, marketplaces, business productivity tools. Those are very popular, not just in the US, and they're growing all over the world.
Are startup founders based in the US going to have a slightly harder PR exercise to draw talent to the United States now? Or is it always going to be a calling to come to Silicon Valley?
Yeah. I mean, as much as I'm not a big fan of some of the things the incoming administration represents, particularly when it comes to civil rights and civil liberties, a lot of other things, I still think that probably most of the policies will be aligned with positive business outcomes, not all of them. I do think hopefully some sane guidance and sage guidance, even if it comes in the form of younger folks in President Trump's camp, will give him good advice about why technology and innovation is helpful for job creation, not just innovation.
And when you're looking over the course of the next 4 years, the startup brood that you have, massive that it is, are you saying go for gold, go for IPOs, remain individual?
I don't know if we care about IPOs specifically.
Or exit?
Yeah.
Or are you expecting more the M&A to be far more active because of the regulatory changes that potentially you're anticipating?
I think that we've already seen a lot of M&A activity. I think last year reported M&A activity was close to or above $50 billion. The IPO market was maybe only about $10 billion. Even though one of our companies, Twilio, went public last year, and hopefully SendGrid this coming year, I feel we're still going to see the majority of our activity coming from M&A activity, and I would suggest that probably both M&A and IPO activity will likely accelerate and grow under the Trump administration. Some of that from tax policy, some of that from maybe loosening regulatory policy.
Let's hope that helps feed the ecosystem even further. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's been wonderful having you on. Dave McClure, founder of 500 Startups. Now, a story we're watching. Samsung says it's found out what caused its Note 7 smartphones to overheat and catch on fire. A person familiar with the matter says Samsung will reveal on Monday that the problem was caused by irregular-shaped batteries made by an affiliate. The fires caused Samsung to kill the Note 7 line and recall the phones, costing the company an estimated $6 billion. Coming up, a Bloomberg exclusive on Snap. The parent company of Snapchat is said to tout more than 150 million daily active users. More details on Snap's metrics. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Elisa Parenti, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's begin with a check of your first word news. President Donald Trump, flanked by First Lady Melania and other family members, took the oath of office on Capitol Hill at noon today. In his inaugural address, President Trump reiterated promises he made on the campaign trail.
From this day forward, a new vision will govern our land. From this day forward, it's going to be only America first. America first.
Former President Barack Obama thanked supporters today before departing for California. Mr. Obama spoke at Joint Base Andrews in Maryland, where he traveled by helicopter with former First Lady Michelle Obama.
This has been the privilege of my life, and I know I speak for Michelle as well. We look forward to continuing this journey with all of you. and I can't wait to see what you do next.
The Obamas plan to stay in Washington until their younger daughter finishes high school. More African nations are recognizing Gambia's newly inaugurated leader. South Africa says it recognizes Adama Barrow as the legitimate president of Gambia and, quote, looks forward to a close working relationship with him and the people of Gambia. The country's former president, Yahya Jammeh, is being urged to step down peacefully. He refused to leave since losing elections in December. Turkey has extended the state of emergency in effect since the failed coup last July. Speaking on Bloomberg television today from Davos, Switzerland, the deputy prime minister said the curfew laws aren't helping to build investors' confidence.
Having state of emergency doesn't help, but there is no too much power on the top. Turkey is still, despite our occasional issues, still a rule of law country, is still a democracy. Let's face it. Had any other country been subject to the type of shocks that Turkey has been subject to, you would have a lot more draconian stuff.
Thousands have been detained or imprisoned since the coup. A referendum on constitutional changes may soon follow. Inmates with makeshift weapons held their ground today at a prison in Brazil where 26 were recently killed. Tensions remained high one day after inmates from rival gangs fought in the yard and set up barriers. Authorities have not regained full control and have not yet provided specifics. And Mexican drug lord Joaquin El Chapo Guzman was hauled into a U.S. courtroom today and then taken away to a maximum facility that has held some of the world's most dangerous terrorists and mobsters. Global news, 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,600 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Caroline Hyde. A big day here in the U.S. as President Donald Trump takes the reins of a divided nation. In his inaugural address, President Trump reiterated promises he made on the campaign trail to make American interests his chief priority. Again, let's bring in Kevin Cirilli of Bloomberg News, who joins us from our D.C. bureau across this all day, Kevin. And harness technologies tomorrow is what he's promised in the tech sector. But what can we expect going forward from Donald Trump?
Two things. First and foremost, he's facing increasing pressure to do something about cybersecurity, facing pressure not only from Democrats, but also from Republicans within his own party as a result of Russia's meddling in the U.S. election. There is, of course, even more growing pressure for investigations within Congress. But the second thing, and perhaps this is where we don't know exactly what he will do, it's that he has vowed to reshape the infrastructure of government agencies, including the IRS, to better the technology to what he argues bring it up to speed with the modern times.
So a few tech issues at the heart of that, Kevin. Thank you. What about come Monday, hitting the ground running as he's promised? Do you expect anything to be announced?
With regards to technology, I think we're going to have to wait and see. But over the next couple of days this weekend, as well as on Monday, I do anticipate that we are going to be hearing a lot about things like how Republicans will get rid of key portions of the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, as well as tax reform and rolling back regulatory regime structures from everything from the environment to Dodd-Frank. But with specifics regard to technology, so far there hasn't been much attention on that. I do anticipate more calls for on cybersecurity on Monday to coincide with the Senate voting to confirm Rex Tillerson as Secretary of State.
Remain all ears, and I know you'll be on the ground for us, Bloomberg's
Yes.
Kevin Cirilli. Thank you, and a good weekend. Now, it's a new era for the tech industry as President Trump takes office. Earlier, I spoke with Bloomberg Technology Executive Editor Brad Stone and Shira Ovide, Bloomberg Gadfly columnist, about the biggest challenges facing the sector as a whole, from the biggest names in Silicon Valley to the startup scene.
I think there's corporate leaders, again, in tech and beyond, optimistic about possibility for tax cuts and less regulation, things that all global business leaders like, again, including people inside of tech.
Brad, when you've been speaking to some of the leaders of the biggest companies, have they been exuding mainly concerns about hiring talent, or is it actually optimism and bringing money home and maybe being able to invest?
I mean, I think there are concerns about the uncertainties of the Trump administration. I mean, there's a paradox here, right? As Shira said, a populist message, but a pro-business reality. And the tech community is delighting in things like a lower corporate tax rate, a tax holiday for repatriating overseas capital, a low regulation environment, and the things that concern the tech community, antitrust. I mean, we're looking at, to head the DOJ's antitrust division, law professors who are fundamentally laissez-faire about antitrust. When it comes to the FCC, it seems like the likely chairman of the FCC is anti-net neutrality, and so we might be going into an environment where not only a lot of these mergers are allowed, but we see the telecoms probably combining and reaping the benefits of some of that net neutrality rollback.
Sure, we talk about the tech giants which dominate the top 10 most valuable companies nowadays, but we also know San Francisco, Silicon Valley, and indeed other pockets, Boston, New York, for the startup community as well. What do we think that community is feeling about Donald Trump?
I mean, I think that's a big question, right? So the net neutrality issue, I think, is a huge one, less so for the giant companies and more so for companies that are coming up from the surface. If you're an online video startup right now, I would be very concerned that if the FCC rolls back net neutrality rules, you're going to have less kind of direct access to consumers without kind of paying up for those fast lanes to people's phones and computers. So I think that's a big issue. And then talent is another one that we saw kind of this revolving door, but in a good way, between the White House and the startup community, people going back and forth.
Condoleezza Rice, you think, went to Dropbox,
exactly.
Colin Powell going over to...
And it's hard to imagine that happening in a Trump administration.
I would add one other challenge for the startup community, which it is fueled to a remarkable degree by energy from immigration and immigrants. I mean, they start a majority of the companies in Silicon Valley. It's remarkable. And obviously, immigration policy will be changed under the Trump administration.
I think what's so fascinating, Brad, you've got a book coming out. The first very opening passage is about how the startup founders of Uber and Airbnb were sat at Obama's first inauguration in Washington in 2008. Do you feel that era of innovation could thrive over the next 4 years?
Look, I don't think entrepreneurs exist or thrive at the behest of the policy of the federal government. I think it's separate. But, Obama did embrace entrepreneurship. No coincidence that the founders of Uber and Airbnb were in the crowd that day 8 years ago. And they used entrepreneurship as sort of foreign policy. Like they started the Global Entrepreneurship Summit, and they held it every year in places like Marrakesh and Nairobi. I don't see that happening under a Trump administration. I mean, they said the Global Entrepreneurship Summit will continue, but it seems to me like the federal government will be less of a sponsor, and there will be challenges, as we've talked about, with things like immigration, but, nothing can stop Silicon Valley at this point.
That was part of my conversation with Bloomberg Gadfly's Shira Overday and Bloomberg Technology Executive Editor Brad Stone. And Alan Patrikoff with Greycroft Partners is still with us. Alan, you've served on councils, on commissions under Clinton, under Bush, under Obama as well. Does politics really affect your investment decisions? I'm
glad you asked that question. I don't think it has any impact whatsoever, certainly on my investments, and I would say on any other venture capitalists that I know. I think we all are very optimistic and very positive looking about the outlook and are involved with exciting new technologies, with exciting new young people. And I don't think there's any startup that I've come across or haven't that is focused at all on the grand political scheme. And they're focused on the excitement of the concept, the idea they have, and implementing that. And even to tell you the truth, I don't think that the change in the tax laws have any impact. First of all, they're not at a point they're paying taxes, most of them, so they're at such early stages. So I think they are full of energy, and the only thing that can happen is if the president does something to dampen that enthusiasm and energy. I think it's pretty hard to stop, though.
What sector most excites you?
Well, I think that there are so many things happening today. We talked to the autonomous vehicle, and it's not. I was with one of the mayors of one of the major cities in the country last night, and was talking to me, which I hadn't even thought about, which is there are programs now out 5 or 10 years where they're going to have a second layer to highways, which will be in effect drone-like vehicles, where we may have a double layer of people commuting commuting, whether on the bottom through autonomous vehicles and on the top through autonomous airborne vehicles, which will be interesting to double the capacity of our highways. I think that robotics is all over the place. The major thing, I think, is AI and machine learning. That is affecting every industry, and it's unfortunately at the same time it's reducing the need for people. A lot of automated activities that are boring and that have been done by individuals for time immemorial will be replaced by machines, which is it's an inexorable trend that I don't think anyone can stop.
And something that I'm sure the new president will have to tackle. Alan Patrikoff, Managing Director of Greycroft Partners, thank you so much for all your time today. Now up next, our full analysis of what the Trump era will mean for tech continues. Venture capitalist Dave McClure joins us to discuss the new president's immigration policies and Silicon Valley's ability to draw top talent from around the world. This is Bloomberg. A revolving door in tech. Ride-hailing giant Uber has just nabbed a former Google executive. Amit Singhal announced on his personal blog that he will join Uber after 15 years at Alphabet's Google, where he led the company's search division. Singhal will serve as Uber's Senior Vice President of Engineering, where he will head up the company's Maps and Marketplace division and will work to scale up Uber's self-driving engineering unit. Now, Silicon Valley leaders were among Donald Trump's most outspoken critics during the presidential campaign. Now, well, as Trump comes into power, could dissatisfied leaders of the tech sector turn angst into a run for public office? There are already rumours that Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg is grooming his public image for a potential run of his own. And one of the few in tech to back Trump, tech entrepreneur Peter Thiel, may be eyeing a run for California governor. Now, that's according to reports from Politico. Joining us now, Bloomberg Technology's Sarah Fryer, and still with us from New York, Greycroft and Partners Managing Director Alan Patrikoff. Sarah, start with you, because Mark Zuckerberg, his 2017 New Year's resolution seems to have a slightly political flavour to it.
Absolutely. He is going from on travels to all 50 states and trying to connect with the people there. He was in Dallas this week for the testimony in the Oculus trial, and he went to a rodeo, he toured a data center. He's really trying to connect with the people. Now, whether that means he's running for office, I think people forget that the U.S. population is 320 million. The population of Facebook is 1.8 billion. Yeah. It's important for him to shape his image as the leader of that as well. So this is not just a ploy for something larger, but he is trying to shape his legacy here. And absolutely, we could see him have much more involvement in government.
Alan, I want to get your view on the lines between Washington and Silicon Valley, the connection there, because we've seen actually the top 5 tech companies paying more in lobbying than the banks have been in the past few years. Are they talking to each other seamlessly, do you think?
I don't think so. Not yet, at least. I think that we just invested in the new newsletter companies were the 3 main people who came out of Politico, and one of the purposes of Axios is to have a newsletter system that connects people out in Silicon Valley with what's going on in Washington, to hopefully be an interface to explaining what that's all about, and vice versa, by the way, because there has been a lack of total understanding between the two communities. And so I don't know what the president has in mind. I know that there are certainly a lot of very talented people out in Silicon Valley who are politically motivated at this moment in time because of frustration over what the outcome was of the election. So it would not at all surprise me. And by the way, there are people also in New York and the rest of the country who are also forming entities and forming conversations to what should be done during the next 180 days and what should be done during the next 4 years.
I mean, we saw pictures just now of one politically motivated man who was actually on Trump's side, which was Peter Thiel. Sarah, there's talk potentially, we heard there from Politico, that maybe he would be running for governor of California. But is he building bridges between the two sides, Silicon Valley and Washington, do you think?
I've heard other things too. There was a report the other day that he might be ambassador to Germany.
Swiftly denied.
Yes, exactly. So I think that Thiel, he told the New York Times that he doesn't want a position in the Trump administration, but I don't think I think that we've seen over the last year that he does really care about the shape that policies take and would like to get more involved. And so I think that would be a really interesting outcome, especially considering his comments recently that he would be cool with California secession.
And always a perhaps slightly offside take. That
right, contrarian
contrarian as always. Great way of putting it. And then last one to you, in terms of, we've seen perhaps a wave of those very high in office from Washington actually come to Silicon Valley to take roles. Condoleezza Rice, Colin Powell. You've even seen the campaign manager of Obama come to work for Uber, and then the Chan Zuckerberg Foundation. Any chance Obama could be coming this way? Is that an obvious track, do you think?
I think I'll take him at face value. Everything, all the pronouncements he's made the last week and last month is he is going to become, he is not going to sit in the sidelines from a political standpoint. He's going to comment on what's happening and be, you might say, a shadow cabinet of one at least to what happens, and not just stand by and observe. I think he's very definitely, and I don't know this personal knowledge, but everything I read is he is not going to be passive like some other presidents have been, just taking that as a position.
Alan Patricof, thank you very much indeed, of course. MD, Managing Director of Greycroft Partners, thank you for your time. Sarah Fryer, thank you also for joining us. But Mr. Patricof will be joining us a little later in the show. And coming up, we'll continue our conversation of the biggest implications for the tech industry under President Trump. This is Bloomberg. This is DC. President Trump, known for his prolific tweeting, now has taken over the POTUS Twitter handle. His first tweet on the account was a Facebook link to his inauguration speech text. He also used his personal handle to tweet after taking the oath of office, highlighting rhetoric from his inauguration speech. His first tweet as president: "Today we are not merely transferring power from one administration to another or from one party to another, but we are transferring power from Washington, D.C. and giving it back to you, the American people. #Inauguration Day." President Obama amassed more than 13 million followers under the POTUS account after first tweeting in May 2015. All of Obama's tweets now live under a new handle, POTUS44. And what device is President Trump using to tweet? According to a new New York Times report, this week Trump turned to his main mobile phone, known to be a Samsung Galaxy, for a secure encrypted device with a new number. This will both help prevent potential breaches as well as stop those who previously had Trump's previous line from contacting the president directly in the future. And finally, let's get to a story not on politics, but on Snap's upcoming roadshow. Ahead of its IPO, the company is hoping to convince public market investors it's worth upward of $20 billion by stressing just how important its app is to users' daily lives. Among some of the stats discussed are the number of snaps, annotated photos, and short videos its users take daily, and how long they spend on the app. Bloomberg Technology's Sarah Fryer broke this story and joins us now from our newsroom. And just how important, what are the figures we're getting in terms of the addiction to this app?
Well, let's be clear that these were numbers that were given to the banks that are underwriting Snap's IPO. So this is still private discussions that are happening before they determine just what they should price this IPO at. And $20 billion is the number we're hearing for the valuation. What we can glean from this is that Snapchat cares desperately about making sure that these investors understand that its users are so enmeshed in using the app on a day-to-day basis that it's really an integrated part of their lives, that they are coming back not just a monthly active user like Twitter touts, but these daily active users that are snapping and saving things to memories and chatting on the app. It's something that sets them apart from Facebook and Twitter in that sense.
Yeah, tell us how it sets them apart, because they were all about monthly active users. They were about expansion outside of the United States, not really about how much is used every single day.
So Snapchat is not really trying to do this race to more and more monthly active users that these other companies have. What this company is trying to emphasize is the average revenue per user. So they're going to focus mostly on these more developed markets that have healthier advertising ecosystems and more proliferation of smartphones, where they can make a lot more money off people using the app. And they're using things that people will actually interact with. One of the things they're talking about in these meetings is geo-filters. Those can be sponsored. I mean, we've heard from advertisers about other methods like overlay, like lenses on people's snaps that are sponsored. And so it's a lot more about involving people in the daily app.
I mean, what's interesting is, of course, the court case is ongoing for a Snap ex-employee about numbers. How much do you think these sorts of numbers will be digested and need to be proved by the executives to support the 20 to 25 billion even that seems to be the success amount?
It is going to be a very high bar for Snapchat and Snap Inc., to convince people that they have what it takes to justify this very high valuation. And certainly the skepticism brought about by that lawsuit, although Snapchat has flatly denied it, will be part of the equation.
Sarah Fryer, as ever, fabulous breaking news for us. Bloomberg Technology, Sarah Fryer. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Remember, all episodes are live streaming on Twitter. Have a very good weekend.